Testimony from a guy alleging sexual abuse by the 7-year-old Za'Niyah Harris. And we're learning of new DNA analysis that could determine whether Jarvis Butts goes on trial for murder. Sean Lay following today's hearing for us. And Sean, this chilling case, it just keeps getting worse and worse as we learn more.
Chilling is a good way of putting it. Stomach turning also. Every witness, every hour here at the court. Here's what's new about this today.
This is the first time we're hearing the voice of Jarvis Butts. He is 41 years old. He is accused of the sexual abuse and murder of a 13-year-old girl named Za'Niyah Harris. She was related to one of Butts' many girlfriends, and he called Za'Niyah his niece. The teen was last seen with Butts after school last January 9th. Then Za'Niyah Harris went missing. Police brought Butts in for this interrogation during a search for her, where Butts told police everything he knew about the girl was on his cell phone that police seized during a search warrant. You have to listen very closely to pick up what Butts is saying, but he says he has nothing to hide.
Everything is in my phone. Y'all have possession of my phone. Take a look at it. Go through it. So I don't know what that's about. I don't know why she said.
A co-worker of Butts testified that Butts and Za'Niyah Harris were at their auto repair shop the evening Za'Niyah Harris vanished. But Butts told investigators the last time he saw Za'Niyah was weeks before.
Yes, he stated to me that he had last seen her at the end of December or early January sometime at the grandmother's house getting her hair done.
Okay. And did he say anything about knowing where Za'Niyah's bus stop was?
Yes.
Okay. What did he say about that?
He said that her bus stop was at a 3-mile drive in Cornwall.
Back here live outside 36th District Court. Keep in mind, everyone, this is not a trial. It's a preliminary examination to see if a judge will move Butts on to face a murder and sexual assault trial. It's going to continue tomorrow. What's happening here is that there's no body to point to. Za'Niyah Harris's remains have never been found, so prosecutors are taking their time to link every dot they can to this defendant. We'll be here tomorrow. They'll also be streaming live on Local 4 Plus. Check it out because it is eye-opening. Live tonight downtown. Sean Lay, Local 4. Back
so much chilling testimony today.
I believe they would have been swabbed, but I don't know if those swabs were submitted.
Okay. You also testified that you found several knives in one of the vehicles, correct?
Correct.
All right. Did you test the knives? I know you tested at least one knife for
Yes.
for DNA. Did you test the other knives for DNA?
The other knives were not tested, no.
Okay. And did you test any of the knives for blood?
I believe we had all the knives swabbed, and then nothing came back leading anything to be blood, but we submitted it on the knife that was up near the driver's seat. The other knives, one was like a butter knife. Another one was like a smaller kitchen knife, but it was like under the back seat. It looked old and crusty, like it hadn't been up there. So the knife that was at the closest access that looked to be not stored in the truck for a very long time, as opposed to the other ones, were the ones that we had swabbed and tested. And then additionally, they were tested with Blue Star. So the knife that reacted to anything that maybe Blue Star reacted to, that was specific why that knife was submitted.
So there was no blood found on that knife, correct?
Correct.
So there was testimony about a black hoodie that was found, correct?
Yes.
Did you personally examine this hoodie?
I did not touch it. It was there. I was there as I observed it being opened up by the evidence technician who was collecting it, as well as going through the photos while we were there and then after.
All right. So the hoodie looked weathered, did it not?
It was wet.
It was wet. There were spider webs in it, correct?
I didn't open it to manipulate it, so if there was something that maybe the evidence tech testified to seeing, I wasn't right there as it was being opened, so I couldn't answer. I did not see a spider web. I can't say that there was not one.
Okay. Did you see any other debris on this hoodie?
So again, the hoodie is wet.
Okay.
A lot of times when articles of clothing are wet, it's hard to distinguish whether there's any other type of stains on there. We're not out there manipulating clothing like that. We preserve it the best that we can. That way, if there is something, it can be properly examined inside a laboratory where I'm not adding more possible contamination to anything.
Okay. But it's fair to say that it's speculation on how the holes would have gotten into it, correct?
Well, I said I don't know how those holes got there.
Okay. Now, we've heard that the hoodie was tested for genetic material, correct?
For DNA?
Yes.
Yes.
Was it tested for gunshot residue?
No.
You also found a pair of red and black shoes, gym shoes, correct?
Yes.
Were they tested for DNA?
No.
Okay. And you seized several cars in this investigation, correct?
Throughout the investigation, yes.
Okay. You had a cadaver dog pass through the cars, correct?
Correct.
Did the cadaver dog give you a hit on any car?
No.
Okay. Just a moment. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Can you redirect? Yes, Judge. Please. Sergeant Jones, that text back on November 27th, 2023, where Za'Niyah replies, "It healed." You can't say what that's about, can you?
Correct.
And defense asked you about some guns that were found and that there was a long gun registered to Angel. But it's true that Mr. Butts can't have any guns around him in his house, can he?
Correct.
Regardless of who they're registered to.
Correct.
And as for the guns, you were asked whether or not they were operable. There weren't tests performed on these guns, were there?
Not that I believe, no.
Okay. And tell me, why is it that there wasn't an emphasis put on doing like test shots for a gun?
The original, when we got the guns, I believe that the priority was to swab for DNA. Is we do that before we start sending them to get test fired and contaminating anything. The guns were swabbed, all the evidence that was collected, and then the items that I believe, after talking with lab specialists and looking at the different things that would be the most successful, to coming back and giving me the answers on whether that was Za'Niyah's hoodie or not, where those were the items that were submitted. Once that hoodie came back that it was hers, there was no need for me to test the shoes that I had a picture of her wearing, because I knew that that hoodie was going to be showing that that was her belongings.
Now, as it relates to guns specifically, if you're trying to connect a gun to a homicide, would you need something to compare it to?
Yes,
Okay, and was there any, there was no body found in this case, that's correct?
correct. You would either need the a projectile that you may recover or find at a scene, or the actual spent casing.
And there was none of that able to be found, correct?
Correct.
And just generally, as just a common person with common knowledge, spider webs can be formed fairly quickly depending on the spider. Is that fair to say?
Yes, there's times I come in the morning and there's already one on my car.
And that wouldn't be there the night before.
Correct.
Okay. Now, in your experience, does Michigan State Police even test for gunshot residue?
I don't believe so.
Okay. And you were also asked about a cadaver dog. You've used cadaver dogs in your history, in your police work?
For 11 years, yes.
Okay. Now, a cadaver dog would only hit if they're in a vehicle, if there was a dead body in that vehicle. Is that correct?
They'll hit on blood, or if there was like biological from somebody that's deceased, something.
So if a body was in a car that was not yet deceased, that cadaver dog presumably would not hit.
Correct.
And you got this investigation in February around the 14th or 15th?
Yes.
Okay, and when was that knife found in Mr. Butts' car?
After we impounded the car, then they did the inventory, the evidence search. It would have been probably a week or so later, and then it's reviewed when I get to that and then submitted.
Okay, so that would have put almost a month and a half, almost 2 months away from January 9th, 2024.
Yes.
Nothing further, Judge.
Yeah, can I ask a couple follow-up questions?
Yes.
So if a gun was used in a homicide, maybe not as a shooting, maybe as just a blunt force instrument, or if it was or if it was a close range shot, couldn't blood or skin cells be on the gun?
Yes.
Nothing further.
Ms. Whitley, any last questions?
No, Judge, thank you.
Yes, Dr. Jones, you are done, Judge.
Thank you.
Any more witnesses for this people?
No, Judge, at this time, the people would have left.
Any defense witnesses?
No, this is fine.
Okay. Let's come back at 3 o'clock for final arguments.
Thank you.
Okay. We almost there.
Counting.
I said one, and I pieces from the road.
You want Mr. Reagan?
Yes, I've never seen that.
You are.
There's 38.
What's that?
38.
38.
Right.
At least 30. No, you look at the PowerPoint.
Oh,
No, I was just counting the number of pheno positives.
okay.
Just this one.
All right.
So, but you can
Yeah.
click through.
What is this?
Someone said earlier about this.
I did.
I know. But feel free to look through it if you want. I don't think it's all exhibits and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't read this mistake then.
I just give you the opportunity.
I appreciate that.
So. And then,
This case is only to review medical.
at this time, people would call Rion Green. Oh, before we do that, Judge. All the left. You just have a Judge, if I may just very briefly move for the admission of people's proposed exhibits. Judge, 41, 52, 53, 54, 55, and 56, which are MSP records 1, 2, 3, 7, 9, and 10 under MCL 76611B.
And for purposes of exam, we have no objection.
It will be admitted.
Thank you. And at this time,
I'm sorry, I just want to repeat, 41, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56.
correct. And then at this time, we would call Rion Green.
tell the truth, no truth, and nothing but the truth. Yes, watch your steps. Also, you can pull that whole microphone off the ledge when you testify so we can hear you better.
Okay.
May I proceed?
Yes.
Could you state your name for the record?
My name is Rion. This is my first name. Green is my last name.
And what do you do for a living, Ms. Green?
I am a forensic scientist with the Michigan State Police.
How long have you been a forensic scientist with the Michigan State Police?
I've been a forensic scientist for almost 4 years now.
4 years?
Yes.
Okay. And do you have first, what is your primary role in, what division do you work in within the Michigan State Police Lab?
I'm in the forensic laboratory and I am in the biology unit, also known as BFI, which is body fluid identification.
And is that what you've done for the 4 years that you've been at MSP?
No, I've actually been at MSP longer than the 4 years. I'm sorry, it's been almost 4 years. But I've been with MSP for a little over 15 years now.
You've been in the lab for the last 4 years, or almost 4 years?
Correct.
Okay. And while your time in the lab, has that been spent on body fluid identification?
Correct.
And do you have any training or education that allows you to do that role in body fluid identification?
Yes, well, my education, I have a bachelor's in chemistry from Tennessee State University. And my training, I went through a body fluid identification scientist training, which included practice samples, mock samples, casework observations, lots of literature to read.
And how long, in terms of hours, was that training? Or how many training hours do you have in total for this body fluid identification job, if you know?
I'm not sure of the hours, but the training was from June of 21 to September of 22.
Okay, so quite a long training.
Yes.
And did you successfully complete that training?
Yes.
And do you go through a recertification or retraining every year on an annual basis?
Not necessarily retraining, but we do have proficiency tests that we do. We have 2 a year that we do, and they are yearly and they are mandatory.
And have you successfully completed all of those proficiency tests?
Yes, sir.
And are you currently working in the body fluid identification field?
Yes.
And how many different cases have you worked on to identify different body fluids that were submitted from law enforcement agencies in the almost 4 years you've worked there?
I don't have an exact number, but at least 100.
Okay.
I can say that.
At this time, Judge, I would move to qualify, or have you testified as an expert previously?
Yes.
And both in Wayne County and outside of Wayne County?
Just Wayne County.
Just Wayne County?
Yes.
At this time, Judge, I would move to qualify Ms. Green as an expert in the field of body fluid identification.
Any objection?
I would just ask how many times she's testified previously
Previously as a scientist, 2.
as an expert.
Yes.
How many?
2.
2. Okay.
Yes.
No objection. Okay.
Thank you. And first, can you describe what is meant by body fluid identification in general terms?
So body fluid identification is the examining evidence items for the possible presence of body fluids such as blood, semen, or saliva.
Okay. And do you use different tests to identify, let's talk about blood primarily.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a test that you use to identify or determine if blood is possibly present before any testing has been done?
Yes.
And we can go to slide 8. And what are we looking at here?
This is the interior portion, be in contact. Like if you pulled the hood over your head, it would be the area up here.
So you're looking at the inside of the hood that would
Interior.
touch the person's head, that floor.
Yes. Yeah.
And slide 9. What in this photo are we looking at here, and has any testing been done at this point?
This is after testing. This is back to the front of the hoodie, plus obviously the sleeves. This is after ALS screening, which is alternate light source, which is used for screening for body fluids such as semen and saliva. I ALS the hoodie, and I marked those areas that had a fluorescence to them with a silver Sharpie, so I could further test after done screening. And IR, which is the infrared, is similar to, it's also an alternate light source, but it's more so for blood on dark items where the dark fabric would become lighter, and if there's blood or possible blood present, it would appear darker. That anything that I saw, I marked with a yellow paint pen with IR next to it, so I can distinguish between the ALS samples, the ALS areas that I saw and the IR areas that I saw.
Okay, and we see a lot of markings on the front of this hoodie.
Yes.
Are you able to tell us, and I know you said the color, but what portion of this is the IR versus the ALS? And it may be easier for you to step down a little bit.
So the ones that I observed actually wrote IR next to them. I don't know if that's visible on there, given how small the picture is, but other photos, I took pictures of
Closer
certain
up.
areas. Yeah.
And if we could just go to the next, or if you could zoom in there. And so, for example, that on the front, as we're looking at it, left side of the zipper, that's where IR illuminated?
Correct. Where there's like where the icon, the hand, oh, it moved. Right there, and there's an arrow pointing to that large area. Like those were areas that dropped out under IR, so I put IR next to it so I'll know what to follow up and how to follow up.
And that IR is to indicate blood, correct? It's not a test for blood, but it's
a screening tool used to locate dark stains that may be.
okay. And if we could go to slide 20. And this is a closer view. Is this after you've done any other testing other than the light screenings?
Yes.
Okay, what testing was done at this point based on this photo?
This is after the pheno.
Ready, Mr. Brigham?
Great.
Okay, we are back on the record. This is case 2459617, the people of state of Michigan versus Jarvis Butts, charged with count 1, homicide, murder, first degree, premeditated, count 2, child sexually abusive activity, count 3, criminal sexual conduct, second degree, person under 13, defendant 17 years of age or older, with a habitual offender fourth offense notice with a mandatory 25-year sentence. I do not need appearances. We are continuing from a lunch break with all parties present. And are the people ready to proceed?
Yes, Judge.
Okay, you can call your next witness.
Judge, at this time, people would call Officer Christopher James.
I swear you in. Raise your right hand. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Okay. Go ahead and take a seat. Just watch your steps going to the box. Whenever you're ready, Ms. Butts.
Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon. Could you please state your name for the record?
Christopher James,
And how were you employed?
Detroit Police Department, police officer,
And how long have you been employed as such?
10 years.
All right. Now I want to take you back to January 30th of 2024. Were you employed as a police officer with the Detroit Police at that time?
Yes,
And were you in a different unit than you are now?
yes.
Okay, what unit were you in?
Cybercrimes unit,
And were you working back on January 30th of 2024?
yes.
Okay. And did you get a chance to perform, well, I guess in your role in cybercrimes, what is it that you did?
For cell phone forensics, or
Would that include like extractions from phones, extractions from tablets, computers?
yes,
Okay. And did you get the chance to perform an extraction on a tablet back on January 30th, 2024?
yes.
Okay. And who was it you got that tablet from, if you remember?
I don't recall.
Okay. Do you know if it was from Detroit Police or Detroit Public Schools or something else?
Detroit Public Schools.
Okay. And when you perform an extraction from a tablet, what is it doing? What do you do?
It's pulling the data from the phone.
Okay. And is it like making a complete copy of what's on that device?
Yes.
Okay. And when you perform that extraction, what do you do once you perform it?
I'll place it on the disk and turn it over to the officer in charge of the case.
Okay. And that disk that you place on evidence, would that be a fair and accurate copy of the phone extract or the tablet extraction that you performed on the tablet for this case?
Yes.
Okay. And you're not moved for the admission of just the phone or the tablet extraction, and I believe it's exhibit. It's going to be proposed exhibit 59.
Any objection?
No objection.
It'll be a minute. People 59.
Thank you. And when you perform an extraction, can you generate what's called extraction reports?
Yes.
Okay. And Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
Now, I'm handing you what's marked as People's Proposed Exhibit 60. Can you tell me if this is a document that you recognize?
Yes.
And what is it that you recognize it as?
Extraction summary.
I'm sorry, the door opened. What did you say?
An extraction summary.
Okay.
A report, a summary of the extraction.
Okay. And is that the report that was generated for the tablet extraction that you did?
Yes.
Okay. And is that a fair and accurate depiction of the extraction that you performed as it relates to this tablet device in which contains contact?
Yes.
And I move for the admission of People's Proposed Exhibit 60.
Any objection?
No objection.
Okay, Officer James, can you please pull that microphone off the ledge and testify into the microphone because it's hard to hear. You can pull the whole thing off. Thank you.
And Officer, what? First, Your Honor, may I publish?
Yes.
So I can follow along with you. Fair to say that you are the examiner name, that would be you.
Yes.
And your organization is the Cybercrimes Unit,
Yes.
and the investigator is listed as a Detective Gardner. Are you familiar with that person?
Yes.
Okay, who is that person?
Investigator with the Detroit Public Schools.
Okay. And what type of tablet is it that you extracted?
Amazon tablet.
Okay. And in this report, going on to page 2, when you do an extraction, you're able to, I guess, select parts of a device that you want to extract. Is that fair?
Can you ask that again?
When you run a report, are you able to select parts that you want to run a report for?
Yes.
Okay. And so in this case, as it relates to contacts, on page 2, tell me what type of contact is number 1?
Instagram.
Okay. And what is the name associated with that?
J-Ball.
Okay. And what's an interaction status?
A chat participant.
In People's Exhibits 33, 34, here, may I approach? The blue dot here What is it that indicates, and what is the importance of that?
This blue dot is gonna be 9,000 comma.
Okay. And that's the address associated with Mr. Butts' auto shop.
Yes,
Okay. And is that the same for Exhibit 34?
yes.
And
The next page is, includes searches that I located inside that, Google return that we received from Google.
okay. And does that document fairly and accurately depict what it is you received back from Google as it relates to a search warrant for Jarvis Butts 82 at gmail.com?
Yes.
And I move for the admission of people's proposed exhibit. I forgot. 63.
Any objection?
No objection.
Would be admitted as people 63.
Okay, now I want to go back to the first page, and use it with the subscriber information. Tell me, who is the subscriber?
So it has a Google account ID number, then it gives a name that says Jarvis Butts. It has an email address, jarvisbutts82@gmail.com. There's also a phone number that's connected to it, which is 313-585-8719.
And is there a birthday associated with that?
Yes, November 21st, 1982. It would have been, I believe, the 15th or 16th of February.
Okay. And what are your duties as OIC on this case?
The OIC begins with the preliminary investigation overlooking the case. On a missing person case, we're obviously making contact with family and getting some witnesses. We also prep a warrant request that's submitted to the prosecutor.
Okay. So you're responsible for collecting evidence?
Yes,
And you're responsible for coordinating the evidence?
correct.
Okay. You conduct interviews, correct?
Yes.
And in fact, you conducted several interviews in this case.
Yes, sir.
Okay. You submit evidence for testing, correct?
Pardon me?
You submit evidence for testing.
Yes, I have.
Okay. And I've seen the prosecution refer to you to make sure they haven't missed anything, correct?
What was your
The
question?
prosecution has referred back to you to make sure they haven't missed anything, correct?
Correct.
So you're the person that makes sure everything in the file is together, correct?
Correct.
And you interviewed several of Mr. Butts' girlfriends, correct?
Yes.
You interviewed, I believe, Tashiana Davis and Shannon Harris on the 15th.
Yes.
And you interviewed Najeen Rushing on the 29th, correct?
I haven't looked at that date, but I trust that that's the 29th.
Okay. Did you interview any of his other girlfriends?
Yes.
Okay. Which girlfriends did you interview?
I interviewed Kizzy Young.
Okay.
There's Tashiana Davis,
Okay.
Angela, and I just cannot remember her last name at the moment, but she is who he resides with on Wilshire.
Okay.
I attempted to make a phone call to another girlfriend. I'd have to look up my reports, but she never came in for an interview.
All right.
There is another girlfriend who her name is Lucretia Bryant Hauser.
Okay.
That may be all the girlfriends. I may be missing one. I'd have to relook at all the witness statements.
So you are aware that Mr. Butts has quite a few girlfriends, correct?
Correct.
All right. And from the very beginning of this case, you suspected, from your beginning of the case, you suspected Jarvis Butts had something to do with Za'Niyah being missing, correct?
Well, when we were discussing the case on the first day, February 12th, DPS had told us the last person that they had contact with and they identified as Jarvis Butts. And then on February 15th, when we verified that Za'Niyah was in fact with him and Cordell on the ride out to Ypsilanti, which is the last day that she was seen, then he became primary suspect.
Okay. And from the beginning, you didn't suspect this was a missing person case, correct?
Well, she's missing. It's been a missing person case. I don't understand your question, I guess.
So you suspect that she was deceased, correct?
I didn't expect that she's deceased from day one. It takes a lot of investigation before you can come to that conclusion.
Okay.
It's not going to be one of those right away. You have to rule out every other possibility.
All right. Didn't you tell Shannon Harris in her interview on the 15th that this is not a missing person case at this point?
I believe I told her that it was not being handled by DPS as a missing person case at that point, and that it's being handled at Detroit Police Homicide Missing Persons.
So you didn't tell her that this was not a missing person case. We're no longer looking for a missing person.
I don't believe that would have been my exact wording. On February 15th?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't believe that would have been my wording, that I would have already come to some conclusion that she was deceased on the 15th.
Okay. Now, during your investigation, did you receive information that Za'Niyah had thought about running away?
Yes.
Okay. Also, during your investigation, did you receive information about a potential sex trafficking ring?
There was several different leads or tips that come in about sex trafficking rings. All those were investigated.
Okay. Now, you interviewed my client, you yourself, with, I believe your partner was Sergeant Lynch, is his name?
Sergeant Sullivan?
Sergeant Sullivan, I'm sorry.
Yes.
You interviewed my client 3 times, correct?
A minimum, I believe, one the 31st, the 1st, and I believe we went back again.
July
possibly
20th?
that.
July 20th?
That sounds about right.
Okay. And you interviewed him 3.5 hours, May 31st, correct?
Is that the time on the recording? Then
Yes.
Okay.
An hour and a half, the second time, correct?
Correct.
And roughly 45 minutes. I believe it was like 38 and some change, the third time.
Okay.
So you interviewed him for close to 6 hours?
That could be true.
Okay. And you took statements from my client, correct?
I mean, we recorded the interview.
Okay. You didn't reduce anything to writing, correct?
No.
He never signed anything,
But
correct?
he signed his advice of right.
Signed advice of right, but he never looked at what he had told you or what your conversation was, correct?
I mean, he verbally acknowledged things throughout the investigation. I did not reduce it down to handwriting.
And your conversation that you had with him, for lack of a good term, was rather fluid, correct?
Was what?
It was rather fluid.
It's a conversation.
There was a back and forth conversation where both you and your partner were talking, and he was just talking back, correct?
A conversation between the three of us?
Right.
Yes,
Okay. And you told him that you wanted his side of his story, correct?
correct.
He did tell you that he was joking about the messages he sent, correct?
The initial messages,
Yes.
so in the very beginning of the interview, he starts off where he denies that that was her. He claimed that he was sending them to his child's mother. It then turned into that he was just joking around with Za'Niyah for entertainment purposes.
Okay.
Then he admits to that all the messages were in fact to Za'Niyah and not to Shannon, because he could never tell that wasn't Shannon talking as you went through the rest of the messages.
But he told you that. Sorry, just one moment.
And that's to a number that.
The next message is on September 27th, 2022. All of these dates are from 2022. So September 27th at 1:37 a.m. UTC. It is sent to Mr. Butts' phone. We fitnessing happy birthday. On that date,
How those holes got that black hoodie.
correct.
Okay. But those holes could be, in your experience, consistent with things that you have observed in your training and experience as it relates to struggles, stabs, bullets, things of that sort.
Correct.
Okay. To Nizaya saying, okay. Any other texts to Nizaya's number after that date?
From Mr. Butts' phone?
Yes.
No.
Okay. There was no
There was no contact between Mr. Butts' phone and the text now number after that.
okay. In your role in this case, did you go through Nizaya's kind of social media records and things like that?
Yes.
Okay. And since January 9th, 2024, have you been able to find anything as it relates, anything from Za'Niyah Harris on social media?
No.
Now, we got to hear some of these text messages in the interview, but going through them, that's it now.
From Mr. Butts' phone, tell me. 9:27, 1:55 a.m. A message is replied to Jarvis, says basement. 1:56 a.m. A message is sent to Nizaya from Mr. Butts' phone that says, "You sure?" At 1:56 a.m., a message is sent to Nizaya from Nizaya to Mr. Butts saying, "or job." At 1:57 a.m., a message is sent to Nizaya from Mr. Butts' phone saying, "Can you suck my dick, please?" The message immediately following that from Mr. Butts' phone to Nizaya, and make sure you erase the messages. Still September 27th, 1:59 UTC. A message is sent to Mr. Butts that says, "Okay, that is what I planned to do." Another message is immediately following that at 2:01 to Mr. Butts You turn me on just looking at you, and then there's a bunch of letters, which possibly is maybe an image that was sent that doesn't capture on the messages. 2:02 a.m. Messiah sends another message to Jarvis. What time to be in the basement? 2:03 a.m. He replies and sends her a message that says, go change your clothes and take your panties off. Messiah replies to Mr. Butts and says the letter K at 2:10 a.m. So 7 minutes later, a message is sent from Za'Niyah to Jarvis's phone. I hear you. What you looking at? Jarvis replies back immediately to her saying the letter U. At 2:13 a.m. UTC, still on September 27th, Messiah sends Jarvis a message that says, I know, I'm finna sleep good. There's another message directly after that that has a bunch of symbols, so I'm not sure if it was a one of those little emojis. 2:14 a.m., she sends to him, what about you? The next message immediately after, sometimes I be wanting to live with you. 2:16 a.m., she sends to him, you know what I mean. 2:18 a.m., she sends, what time I'm ready. 2:23 a.m., she sends to Mr. Butts' phone number, we not doing it or what? 2:23 a.m., Messiah sends to Mr. Butts, I really want you. This is still on the same day, September 27th, 2022. This is now 2:23 a.m. UTC time. Mr. Butts replies to Za'Niyah, yes. 2:24 a.m. Messiah sends, pull your car down the street and come back. I'll be waiting. 2:25 a.m. Jarvis's phone replies back to her, come ride with me and Nye, N-I-Y. 2:25 a.m. she replies, did they say I can come? At 2:30 UTC, she sends him a message that says, I'm sorry, but love you. 2:30 UTC, he immediately replies back, come on. 2:31, Messiah replies, I can't, I'm going to get in trouble. The next message is at 2:35. She sends, when you come back, drop Nye off, pull your car down the street, and I'll come in the base. I'll be waiting. Then immediately after that, she sends, basement, please. Jarvis replies, okay. At 2:40, Jarvis replies, you in the basement yet? Immediately after that, Za'Niyah replies back, yeah. Now we are the next day being, it's now September 28th, 2:28 a.m. UTC. She sends a message that says, are we doing it tonight? I'm ready, fresh out the shower. The next message is a reply from him to her. Well, this is September 30th now at 1:25 a.m. UTC. He replies, yo. September 30th, 2:59, she replies, you coming over? She then sends another message directly after that, don't have school. At 3:07, a reply is received to Za'Niyah from Jarvis saying, "Yep." She then replies, "Okay, we'll be waiting." At 3:17 a.m., he sends another message, or I'm sorry, she sends a message to Jarvis that says, "Text me when you get here." At 3:21 a.m., this is still September 30th date, Jarvis replies and sends a message to her saying, "Outside." Now we have skipped to September 30th on here at 23:13 hours UTC. She sends a message to Jarvis saying, "Hey boo, you coming over?" The next message is now October 1st, 2022, 1:51 UTC. She sends a message to Jarvis asking, "You coming?"
And are there any other messages to Jarvis after that? Mr. Butts' phone.
No.
Okay. And now, do those indicate whether or not they were deleted?
Yes.
Okay. And which?
Analysis here and hypothesis and result pertains to the left shoulder swab, or sorry, right shoulder swab on Za'Niyah Harris's black hoodie that she took that picture in when she was in school on January 9th. The one, importantly, that Annette Harris testified was in condition when Za'Niyah left. We will get to pictures of that, but this shows that Za'Niyah Harris's DNA is there as well as Jarvis. And importantly, this is one of the stain swabs that was positive not just for blood, but human blood based on the hemotrace results. In the next one, we have, this pertains to not the stain swabs, but the regular swab that Breon Green testified was a wearer ID swab. Importantly here, Jarvis Butts' DNA from that swab that would have been taken around the neck of that sweater or the end of the arms of that sweater is there with very strong support. And of course, Za'Niyah's DNA is there as well. And when we look at that sweater specifically through the PowerPoint photos that Breon Green took and put together, we can see that there is a lot of markings on this. If the court looks closely on this, and I did, there are 15 phenol positive stain markings on this sweater. This is just the front of that sweater. And of course, the court paid attention and saw the markings or the damage to the hood that it is the people's theory would have been stab wounds or something to that effect that happened when Jarvis Butts murdered Za'Niyah Harris. We also have to look, and it goes to the premeditation element as well as everything he did before at Jarvis Butts' actions, specifically what he did to attempt to conceal or cover up his role in the murder of Za'Niyah Harris. First, we have the glasses that he made sure he grabbed directly from Latricia Johnson's hands when shown, that are consistent with the glasses she had in the photo from the 9th when she was in school. We have the jail call to Cordell Wright to get that phone of his out of Miss Davis's car and into someone else's possession, which he testified he tried to do, but was ultimately unsuccessful. And then Sergeant Jones testified that they ultimately did recover that phone from Miss Davis's car. There's the phone call to Latricia Johnson, which was played when she was testifying, saying to get anything he touched clean, to clean anything he touched, to get anything, don't drive her car, drive his mom's car, which is important because when you combine her testimony of when Jarvis Butts took her car, those 2 times on the 9th and 10th, and then either the next day or that same day, it's important because that car is the car that he transported Za'Niyah Harris out to 7 Mile and Bird to either dump her body or to murder and then dump her body there. And we can go through all of the lies that Jarvis Butts told any detective or any officer that he testified to, but in highlighting those, he denies to Detective Mays that he was with Za'Niyah at all or had talked to Za'Niyah at all on the 9th, denies ever picking her up, denies to, even when confronted with the January 9th messages, he said that it wasn't him initially. Obviously, we heard in the subsequent interviews, specifically on June 1st with the OIC, he came off of that. He told Shannon Harris that Za'Niyah texted him on the 9th. She says that he never did that. And we have some of their messages in the record as well. He denies going to a hotel and denies going to a hotel with Za'Niyah Harris and denies having any sort of sexual relationship with Za'Niyah, even though the text now messages completely prove that that is an absolute lie. We also have his motive. We know from Sergeant Jones that he was going to be going into custody supposedly on January 9th for until roughly December, I believe, is what Sergeant Jones testified to. We know that that date was adjourned because he said in his interview that he had a legal issue. He said it was out in Clinton Township, but I submit to this court that that's not the legal issue he was talking about. He was talking about the legal issue he would have had if Za'Niyah had been left alive. He had to make sure that when he was in custody that she was not going to give birth to any child of his. That's his motive in this case. That's why that's January 9th. Sentencing date was adjourned to February 7th so he could take care of that potential legal issue. He was being told consistently by Za'Niyah throughout the months that she might be pregnant, and then on 11/27, she says to him that it's hard to do this gym shit with this baby. Less than a week or 2 weeks later, he's searching on Google how to abort a baby, how to not just abort a baby or get an abortion, but how to do it at home, how to get rid of that without any medical professional or any responsible mandated reporter knowing about it. We clearly have that motive. And obviously, Judge, one of the big issues in this case is proving that Za'Niyah Harris is dead without having a body. On January 9th, she vanished off the face of the earth. There is absolutely no evidence after the 9th that she was alive, that she was sending messages to anyone. Her, again, legal guardian had not seen her since the 9th. No one else, officers, friends, family have seen her since the 9th. There's no social media post reviewed by any officer to this day that would indicate she was alive. There's no messages, no further messages on text now after the 9th. There is a full and complete stop of any activity that would indicate she was alive. And Judge, I submit to this court that if that were the evidence that we had at this point, that would be enough at this point for a probable cause determination to show that she is in fact deceased today. However, there is more than that. Her hoodie found at 7 Mile and Berg, which we just saw a photo of, has Jarvis Butts' DNA on it and Za'Niyah Harris' DNA on it, and it is covered in blood, indicating that something traumatic happened to her. And all the other evidence shows that something traumatic happened to her at the hands of Jarvis Butts. And then we go back to his motive, was told by Za'Niyah that she was pregnant, searched all of the home abortion procedures, and was going to go into the Wayne County Jail until December, which we just passed, of 2024. Judge, I submit to this court that the evidence that you have heard over the last 4 days proves not only that Za'Niyah Harris is currently deceased, but also that she was murdered by the defendant who had plenty of motive to do so, had plenty of opportunity to do so, and he did that. And I will note that the defendant in this case, Jarvis Butts, does not get a break because he successfully hid her body. The evidence to a probable cause determination, which the question is she probably dead? And did the defendant probably do that? Both questions are answered with a yes, based on all of the evidence that you have seen. I would reserve any further argument for rebuttal. Thank you.
Attorney Quick?
Thank you, Judge.
Sorry.
I know how well aware the court is that we have a very serious task here. We've been here for 4 days, and at this point, we have to look critically at what we've heard and what we've seen over the last 4 days and determine if there's enough evidence by a probable cause standard that Mr. Butts committed premeditated first-degree murder. And if you look critically at what the evidence is and the lack of connection between these pieces of alleged evidence, there is not even by a probable cause standard. To bind over on premeditated first-degree murder, there has to be sufficient facts or evidence to show by a probable cause standard that each of the elements of premeditated murder in the first degree were committed. First, there's got to be a death. There has to be evidence that the defendant caused the death of the deceased, that some action that he made or did caused that person's death, that there was an intent to kill, that the intent to kill was premeditated, and that it was deliberate. And here there is not enough evidence, even by a probable cause standard, that Jarvis Butts caused the death of Za'Niyah Harris. There's been no testimony of any eyewitness stating that they saw Jarvis Butts doing any act that could have caused Za'Niyah Harris's death. There's been no testimony of any eyewitness that they saw Jarvis Butts doing anything in preparation of doing something that could have caused her death. And there's been no admission of Mr. Butts to support that element. There's not probable cause to believe that Mr. Butts had an intent to kill Za'Niyah Harris, nor that he premeditated her death. There's no evidence of any threats made by Mr. Butts to Za'Niyah. There's no evidence of any threats made to a third party that he was going to do something or that he had a problem that he had to take care of. The issue or the statement was he had a legal matter. And Ms. Davis testified that she was aware of an issue that he had in Clinton Township and that she was the one that was driving him around to court. There's no testimony that he took any specific action in a deliberation to kill her or that in killing her. There's Google searches about legal ways to abort a child, not how to kill somebody or dispose of a body. There's no evidence that he did anything related to the Google searches. There's no receipts of purchases or anything like that. And these text messages were 2 weeks after they were, I believe, December 9th and 10th, which was, I believe, 2 weeks or 13 days from 11/27/23, which is the text message about gym class. And then there's this kind of cryptic text message in between that says it healed. We don't know what that means, but we don't know what Mr. Butts took that to mean. It doesn't necessarily mean that he believed she was pregnant. There's no evidence of a pregnancy. We have medical records until, I believe it's October of 2023, that don't indicate a pregnancy, that she had been to the doctor in September when she originally texts or messages Mr. Butts and says she thinks that she's pregnant. There's no evidence of a pregnancy. She went to the doctor. We heard from both her guardian, her grandmother, and her aunt, Shannon Harris, who lived with her. No testimony from either of them that they suspected that she was pregnant, that there was any medical issues that they had to take care of because that would have caused them to think that she was pregnant. There was an insinuation, well, was she wearing baggy clothing? Was she wearing bigger clothing? There was no testimony that they had to go out and buy new clothes for her because her clothes didn't fit, or that she started wearing baggy clothing. She was wearing denim pants on the day that she disappeared. And there's no testimony that those were not pants that they had recently bought because she didn't fit into the clothing that she previously had. There's no evidence of any kind of plan There's no messaging between Mr. Butts and Ms. Harris that indicates an escalation of animosity between the two of them. In fact, he essentially kind of starts to disengage. And so there's no written evidence that he had any kind of plan or any animosity toward her at that point. Our submission would be that he understood at that point that she wasn't pregnant and was disengaging. Let's talk about what we did see. So we know that Za'Niyah got on her school bus around 2:45 on the 9th. She got off the bus a few minutes later, and then she was seen walking up Bedford. She was wearing at that point light color blue jeans, a black hoodie, and then a colorful coat with fur around the hood. There's some insinuation that somehow there was a plan that she would meet up with Mr. Butts, but the testimony of Mr. Wright was that they were driving around that afternoon back and forth to various auto parts stores, and I believe that they in fact had to go back to one kind of unplanned because they either missed something or there was an issue. And so to say that somehow Mr. Butts would have known that she would have been on that street at that specific time and that they would have been there at that specific time is quite a leap, considering they didn't know where they were going to be when, because they were doing all this driving around back and forth to various stores. Witnesses put Za'Niyah at Mr. Butts' auto shop later that afternoon, and then in Ypsilanti with Mr. Butts and Cordell Wright, and Mr. Wright puts her back at the shop later that evening. But then we hear from Sergeant O'Rourke, who did all the cell phone mapping, that at 9 p.m., Mr. Butts was actually at 13662 Wilshire, which is his home, where Angel Leonard lives and where they have kids. So did Za'Niyah go back with him to that house? And then at 9:30 is when he checks in to the Park Crest Motel. Now, we don't know who was with him there, but there is no evidence that Za'Niyah was ever there. They searched it. They took DNA. They took clippings of various things. They swabbed the shower drain, and there's no evidence that she was ever in that room. We did hear testimony that the Park Crest is a known place where Mr. Butts frequents and takes various lady friends for a rendezvous. It's much more possible and plausible that he took one of his lady friends there, than somebody who he was going to kill, right? He's going to a place where they know him. He's a frequent flyer there. And is he going to take somebody there where he would later, before he was going to kill them? That makes no sense. That is not logical. We heard then that after Mr. Butts left the Park Crest Motel, he went to 4 Alexandrine, which is Midtown, so kind of across town. And that's where his other girlfriend, Najeen Rushing, lives. So did he take Za'Niyah with him there to see Miss Rushing? And he stays there for a while, I think, according to Sergeant O'Rourke's mapping. And then we hear that he is at 7 Mile and Berg on January the 10th at 11:40 p.m. for over an hour. That's almost 24 hours from when he initially, it's beyond 24 hours from when he initially is with Za'Niyah, or when he's last with Za'Niyah. And so it's illogical to think that he was driving around with Za'Niyah, visiting all of his girlfriends, or if he had done something to her previously, that she was in the car with him while he did that. And in fact, they took a cadaver dog around the car and didn't find anything. And they tested the vehicles, all of his vehicles, every car that he drove, for DNA, for any sign that Za'Niyah had been in there, and they found nothing. And the call to Miss Johnson asking her to wipe down the Sentra that she used, that he had borrowed, is kind of irrelevant because she testified that she didn't do it. That she did nothing based on what he called to say, and they still didn't, nothing was found. We heard about a pink jumpsuit that was found. We didn't hear any testimony that anybody saw Za'Niyah wearing this pink jumpsuit. She's not seen wearing it in any video. I don't believe that anybody even identified it as being hers. I don't believe there was any testimony from either Annette Harris or Shannon Harris stating, yes, we recognize that pink jumpsuit. That's something that Za'Niyah wears. When did she have it? There was one blood stain on that jumpsuit. And the testimony from the forensic analyst, Rion Green, was that it was such a small stain that she was afraid she would consume it if she did additional testing. She tested it once and couldn't do any follow-up testing or confirmatory testing because she was afraid they were going to consume the sample. There was also no statistically significant support for finding Mr. Butts' DNA on that stain sample from the pink jumpsuit. And there was no statistically significant probability that his DNA was on the jumpsuit at all, that he had had any contact with the jumpsuit. And they took a lot of swabs of that jumpsuit. I believe the number was that forensic analyst Anderson testified to, that it was 24 trillion times more likely to have originated from two unrelated unknown contributors than Jarvis Butts. Then we heard about the black hoodie. And that black hoodie was significantly more weathered than the pink jumpsuit. We heard about that from the Border Patrol agent Barnes and other folks that came into contact with that sweatshirt, that it looked like it had been out in the weather much longer. And we don't have an explanation for that, but those appear to be tears in the top of the hood. They don't appear to be stab wounds, and they certainly don't appear to be bullet holes. There's weak support for conclusion that Mr. Butts was a contributor to the stain on the swabs of the black hoodie. The only real support for any DNA on the black hoodie was on the non-stained part. And there's testimony that Ms. Harris was wearing that hoodie on the 9th, that she was in Mr. Butts' Escalade when he and Mr. Wright picked her up after seeing her walking down Harper, that they were in the car driving in up to Ypsilanti. And so the possibility that his DNA got on this non-stained part of the black hoodie is not evidence of premeditated murder in the context of all of the ways that we heard somebody's DNA can get on a piece of clothing. And I kind of talked about this, but we heard testimony that Mr. Butts drove both a Cadillac Escalade and a Nissan Sentra on January 9th and January 10th. There's a lot of pieces of those cars that were tested. Trunk carpet from various areas in both cars, the driver's floor mat, the driver's seat, the door handle, trunk speakers, the trunk frame. All of those things were swabbed for blood and nothing was found. We heard about a school ID card that belonged to Za'Niyah. We heard Valerie Smith testify that she noticed it at some point in February, maybe a month or so after Za'Niyah was last seen, and that she decided to pick it up 2.5 weeks after she first spotted it. But she was pretty clear that she only noticed it about 2 weeks before, but that she looked at it every single day. Seemingly, if it had been there before then, she would have noticed it. When did it get there? We don't know. There was no evidence. There's no testimony as to that. And there was no other evidence found in the 7 Mile and Greenfield area, and there's no evidence that Mr. Butts was there. We talked a little bit about the medical records, but all they tell us is that Za'Niyah Harris didn't have a life-threatening condition as of October 24th. They don't tell us anything about her physical condition between the 24th and the 9th, and they don't tell us that she was pregnant. They're just not relevant, except for the fact, I guess, that they don't tell us that she was pregnant, and she was there on September the 27th, according to her text messages. What we haven't heard in the last 3 to 4 days is anything about a murder weapon. We've heard that they collected guns, but we don't know if any of them actually operated, and they tested them for DNA, and there was nothing found. When did those guns get taken from a house? When did they get put back, if any of them had been used? And I mean, we just simply don't have any evidence as to whether they were even touched by Mr. Butts. But certainly there was no DNA from Ms. Harris on them. And if one was to use a gun to bludgeon somebody enough where they break the skin and bleed, there's going to be DNA on that gun. If somebody is shot at close range by a gun, there's likely to be DNA on that gun. They found no DNA on a gun. There was initially a testimony about all these knives that were found. And then when Mr. Riggins did a little bit of digging, well, one of them was a butter knife. One of them was rusted and under a seat and looked like it had been there forever. There's only one knife that they were actually interested in. They sent it for testing, and there was nothing on it. And we know that they can test for blood even if something has been wiped clean, because they do that, and in fact, they did that in this case. They found no blood on anything that the prosecution is positing could have been a murder weapon. Motive is not an element of premeditated homicide. There's evidence that Mr. Butts and Za'Niyah had a sexual relationship. And we are, at this point, not contesting the bind over on those counts. That would explain why Mr. Butts would not want to be honest about why he was with Za'Niyah Harris. That would be enough to make somebody want to lie about their whereabouts or their connection to somebody. There's no evidence that it went any further than that for him. No evidence that he had been confronted by anybody about a sexual assault. No evidence that he was being threatened by Za'Niyah to expose him or get him in trouble if he didn't do something that she wanted him to do. By the time January 9th rolled around, they weren't really speaking that much. She was, in those text messages that we heard, getting frustrated with him for ignoring her. But never once did she say, well, if you don't talk to me, I'm going to tell everybody what we've been doing. And so there's a complete lack of any motive for him to respond in that way. And I would point the court to a case, it's called People v. Fisher, and it's 193 Mishap 284. It's a 1992 case, and I've got copies. Got it. Does court want? Yeah. And I point the court to this case because it's a case where homicide was charged and no body was found. A woman named Joyce Fisher was killed, and I believe it was 8 years after her death, her husband was charged. He was convicted, and ultimately the appellate court reversed the conviction because the evidence was insufficient to submit the case to a jury. And so that was the error. And kind of the facts briefly are that Mr. and Mrs. Fisher were in the process of divorcing. It was a pretty contentious relationship. There had been lots of reports that he had been physically abusive to her. And she had even testified that he had threatened to kill her in mid-January of 1978, approximately 3 months before she disappeared. In April of 1978, apparently they were out together, they had lunch, and he was the last person to see her. After that, she disappeared. Now, there was no substantial testimony in that trial regarding her reliability, her long or short-term plans, that she had children, that she was devoted to them, and that she wouldn't have any reason to run away or leave. And so that gave rise to an inference that she was deceased. The prosecutor in that case offered no evidence of an act that resulted in Joyce Fisher's death. And the court previously has held that the victim's body, while it's not necessary to establish corpus delicti, there has to be something more. There has to be, in this case, either an admission or confession, physical evidence, or some kind of witness testimony. In that case, there was no physical evidence, such as bloodstains or a weapon, linking the defendant to Joyce's death. He did not admit that he killed her, although the prosecutor offered equivocal statements there, that he seemed to say, well, things didn't happen quite that way, and where it made it sound like maybe he did have something or some knowledge. The prosecutor there presented lots of evidence of defendant's motive and opportunity, noted that those are not elements of the crime. And inferences, the court says, may not be based on evidence that is uncertain or speculative or merely raises a conjecture or a possibility. And they said in that case, the evidence did not rise above the level of conjecture. And that's what we have here. We have conjecture.